How's it going, guys? Today we do some tech archaeology in a computer from 2004. This PC was sent to the channel by the greatest mechanic alive, and judging by the paint job you can tell it was owned by a car nut. And this is why this is the Hot Rod PC. First of all, we have to take a look at this towering monster of a case. This thing is huge. It actually makes it a bit clumsy to film. I don't have a lot of room here in the lab, and I can barely get far enough to film it properly. This is the Chieftec Matrix full tower case. It was actually a bit difficult to track down the model. The Antac Dragon was another case of this type that was so popular that it's actually the only one that comes up on Google Images from this period. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, the paint job. Yikes! Back in 2004, having a custom paint job done on your PC was the pinnacle of PC Master Race, and for the paint job in the Mechanics PC, I can't imagine anything better than a hot rod paint job with flames and everything. On the back, we can see I/O from a motherboard that has cool features that stand out, like double Ethernet ports, only present in premium motherboards up to today, Firewire port, and a few sound jacks coupled with an optical digital output. Back then, 80mm fans were much more popular than the 120mm standard we use today, and seeing how big this case is, it makes a lot of sense to have two of them for exhaust. The video card has two DVI outputs and a multi-port plug that is accessed by a breakout cable. I found one that fits from this old PixelView TV and video capture card, not that we are going to need it. This PC had been sitting in storage for a very long time, probably more than 10 years, so it looks pretty disgusting inside. But somewhere under the dust, I can see there are some pretty cool parts. Starting from the top, we have the Antac True Power PSU with 430 real watts. Back in the 2000s, it was common to have nominal wattage on the PSUs that actually meant you got much less than advertised. We have a fancy ribbon cable wrapped up in tube to look more sleek, and we even have an attempt at sleeving some of the ketchup and mustard PSU cables. The motherboard we got here is an MSI KAN Neo 4 Platinum SLI. Phew. So a premium motherboard from 2004. I love these. They are from the same era as the famous DFI LAN party motherboards and support some of the same components. This mobile uses the NVIDIA Enforce 4 SLI chipset and has 4 slots for DDR memory at up to 16 gigs with 400 MHz in dual channel. A feature that really stands out is the onboard Sound Blaster Live 24-bit. In 2004, Realtek onboard sound was already popular, but the cool kids used Creative's off-board sound cards to get premium sound and 3D sound acceleration. That takes the sound processing load off the CPU and actually grants you a few more frames per second in demanding games. Besides that, it gives you cool sound profiles like EAX, also known as environment audio extensions. This board took that same premium sound processor from expansion cards and made it an onboard feature. To determine if you're using two video cards in SLI or not, the Enforce 4 SLI chipset requires that you make a physical adjustment with this daughter board. You have to swap sides of the daughter board to indicate if you're using a single or SLI dual card setup. So glued to this cooler, there's an Athlon 64 3000 Plus, and this is what happens when you use toothpaste as thermal compound, folks. This is nowhere near the fastest processor on the platform, but this is a very smart choice. You see, this processor only came at a little over $200. This was an incredible feat. At this time, Intel was still rolling out Pentium 4s, and they got so intimidated with the Athlon 64 performance that a week before the release, they sneaked an announcement about the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. It was to compete and allegedly beat in performance the Athlon 64 processor, coming in at a measly $999. The Hot Rod PC only came with one DIMM of 1GB DDR4 RAM. The system can benefit from dual channel, but at this time we are only testing with the base system. We had one video card in the slot and one just hanging around inside the case. It's a PCI Express XFX Geforce 6600 GT. Both video cards are exactly the same, but the loose one has a cool Zalman cooler slapped on it. They were really popular around this time, and it even has the little Zalman heatsinks on the video RAM. Awesome! The 6600 GT is based on the NV43 chip running at 500 MHz. It has 8 pixel shaders, 3 vertex shaders, 128 megs of GDDR3 with a 128-bit bus. This card was above average. The memory runs at an effective 1200 MHz while the reference model runs at 1000 MHz. A modest GPU, but pretty capable as far as I can remember. I don't really know if both of these cards work, but if they do, we might be able to get some SLI. For now, as always, we are sticking to the base system. Now I'll do a quick cleanup of the parts with isopropyl alcohol, wipes, and a toothbrush. But what really needs cleaning is the case. Boy, this case is dirty, but nothing that a bit of elbow grease can't fix. Case is clean and there is something that needs to be addressed. The drive bay door is broken. With a little creativity, this is hardly a problem. I'm going to use a bolt of the appropriate size and replace the pin that held the door in place. I'm using the soldering iron and a pointed screw to make the hole for the bolt. The top part of the door also needs some work. I'm using a nail that luckily is just the right size to be jammed in there and hold the door to the pin on the case. Now a quick word about PSUs. The Antec True Power that came with the hardware PC is no doubt a quality PSU, but it's more suited for older systems using motherboards with AGP slots. Reason being that the PCI Express slots delivers more power to the video card, and this is why newer PSUs have 4 extra pins. You can see that the AGP version of this video card requires external power, while the PCI Express doesn't. The slot can supply all the power it needs. This is why we're going with the Enermax, my old and sturdy workhorse PSU. If we decide to do an SLI setup, the Antec PSU would probably be a bottleneck. For storage, we're going to use a regular hard drive. Why not? Loading times on these guys are not very high at all. A regular spinning disk hard drive is practical, 100% compatible, and fast enough for this use case. Now, as a minimalist, I would not put all 4 screws on this hard drive, but this removable hard drive bay doesn't have supports for the hard drive, so unless you put all 4 screws in, it kinda hangs sideways. This is where we encounter our second issue with the SLI setup, the first one being the PSU. It seems that the motherboard came with an aftermarket chipset cooler, and that rendered the second PCI Express slot unusable. I don't even know if the second video card works, but until the chipset cooling issue is addressed, SLI is off the table. Our last little hiccup here is that there is something missing on the CD-ROM drive bay, and whatever you put in there stays loose. So I'm just going to use these little plastic VGA connector covers to support the CD-ROM drive on the bottom and jam it on the side so it doesn't move. Alright, I can hardly believe it, but we are done with the Hot Rod PC's base system. Thankfully there were no faulty parts, and the Windows XP and driver installation was a breeze. For the games, as usual, we have a selection of games from around the time period of this build. The Athlon 64 Winchester and the Geforce 6600 GT are both from 2004, so we're starting our game test on 2002 and going forward from that. All of the games were tested in a 1440 by 900 resolution. It's a 16 by 10 aspect ratio. It's a bit ahead of the time of this computer. Some of the games didn't natively have that option. They were either patched or the resolution was set at the .ini file. Gothic II was developed by Piranha Bytes. It was released in Germany in 2002 and in the US in 2003 by Jowood Productions. It's an open-world action RPG in which you, the hero of course, is saved by the mage Zardas. After some contextualization by Zardas, you follow his guidance on quests to relinquish evil things. The game is set to the maximum possible settings and runs at an average of 50 FPS. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and it was published by Ubisoft in the end of 2003. It's the first 3D reimagination of the classic MS-DOS Prince of Persia game. It's pretty fun and keeps your frustration at bay with the rewind feature of the Sands of Time when you make a big mistake. The game runs comfortably at more than 60 FPS on the highest settings. Unreal 2: The Awakening is a game developed by Legend Entertainment and published by Infogrames in 2003. There's quite a lot of drama around the release of this game. It basically lost features that were promised so that they could be released in Unreal Tournament 2004 on the following year. But ignoring that and considering all the games I looked for this video, this one is the one I like the most. Textures are crisp, not too pointy, space and ships look beautiful, and it's damn well optimized, running on high settings, averaging between 70 and 90 frames per second. XIII was developed by Southend Interactive and released by Ubisoft in 2003. This game is based on a graphic novel and it brought the style to the game. In my opinion, it looks stunning, and as a side effect of the style, it's well optimized and fast. You play sort of a 007 character and do missions as you are contextualized by flashbacks in the middle of the game. The game doesn't give you any options for the graphical settings and it runs at around 60 FPS. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault was developed by EA Los Angeles and it was released in 2004 by EA Games. The game is about campaigns on the Pacific theater of World War II. We are using medium graphical settings and shader model 2.0. We're seeing an FPS average of 30, the CPU here being the major bottleneck on the game. Not the best experience, but for an old game, it's playable. Prince of Persia Warrior Within is a sequel to the Sands of Time game we saw earlier, developed and published by the same game studios and released at the end of 2004. This game looks a bit better than the prequel, it's more focused on combat and a bit less platforming. Also a fun game, it's quite a bit more demanding than Sands of Time, and it runs at 30 FPS with quality settings set to the maximum possible. Fear is an FPS game in which you are part of the First Encounter Assault Recon team, put together to fight against paranormal entities. The game was developed by Monolith Productions and published in 2005 by Vivendi Games. It was fairly demanding. Here we see its built-in benchmark running with all graphical settings set to medium. The benchmark 2 indicated an average FPS of 37, which is not ideal but should be playable. The Dungeon Siege series is all about exploring jungles and dungeons. It's a real-time action RPG game in which you and your party battle lots and lots of monsters. You have to pick one of the 4 classes to train your character, and those being melee, range, nature or combat magic. And you level the powers up not by choosing a specific path at the beginning of the game, but by using the chosen power in combat. I like the series, and this one here is Dungeon Siege 2, released in 2005. It was developed by Gas Powered Games and published by Square Enix. The game is set to the highest possible settings and it ran at an average of 30 FPS. Need for Speed Most Wanted, believe it or not, is the 9th game in the NFS series. Most Wanted was developed by EA Canada and published by Electronic Arts in 2005. The game is running on the minimal graphical detail settings and it's clear that it's quite demanding. With these settings, the game runs at a healthy average of 60 FPS. Tomb Raider Legend is the latest and last game we're testing in the system. It's developed by Crystal Dynamics and released by Eidos Interactive in 2006. Well, there isn't much I can say about the Tomb Raider series. Everybody knows the games. The series is a pioneer in 3D accelerated graphics, and this game has a feature that shows that. With all the graphical options turned on, except anti-aliasing and next-gen content, the game runs at an average of 60 FPS. But when you turn the next-gen content on, the FPS drops drastically and you basically need a next-gen graphics card to play it with those settings. So that was it for the Hot Rod PC. I did have other plans to it. I sort of want to see it reach its potential by overclocking it, using dual channel, using SLI. But at the last moments of footage, I tested the second video card that came with it, and the second video card didn't work. Unfortunately, it stopped booting after that. So I'm still gonna try using another PSU. Maybe the Enermax PSU I was using gave away. These parts are old, so you can expect that. Maybe the motherboard decided it didn't want to work anymore. So unfortunately, I have to change my plans a bit. Next week, we're not going to be seeing more of the Hot Rod PC like I planned. But in the future, we're probably going to be going back to it. I hope you got some useful information out of this video, or at least have some fun. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.